We have our very last session today for the Institute of Historical Research Food History Seminar. Uh, and we have a round of lightning talks. We have two scholars for you today. We have Nouran Rabie, and she's an MA student at the American University in Egypt. And her paper is entitled Seeds of Change, Egypt's Early Modern Culinary History Between Resistance and Appropriation. And our second speaker is Maria Vanko, and she is a PhD student at the Kiev School of Economics, Public History and Memory Studies. And her paper is entitled Food, Cultural Memory, and the Identity of Crimean Tatars. So today, these lightning talks will take the form of roughly 5 to 10 minutes of presentation each. And afterwards, we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A after both presenters have finished. So again, I want to welcome everyone to the Institute of Historical Research Food History Seminar. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with Nouran Rabie.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, can you see it properly? Perfect.
Yes, it's perfect.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Nouran Rabie. I'm an MA student at the American University in Cairo, and this is a presentation that is basically an introduction to my thesis, which I'm currently writing. So this is very much at the beginning of my writing. So if you have any suggestions or ideas, I would be really, really happy to receive them. So what you can see now is that my paper is titled Seeds of Change, Egypt's Early Modern Culinary History. And my time frame is between 1800 and 1950. So this is basically how my paper will be structured. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about modernity and what it means, and then just a recap for you about the medieval what we know of the medieval period, what was there before the time period I'm focused on, and then my search for a cookbook from the 19th century, which was more difficult than it should have been. And then historical context for that cookbook. And then we move forward to the 20th century, where we see the adaptation of the change I talk about being realized in cookbooks and magazines and home economics manuals. Okay, so first off, I want to say a few words about modernity. So I wrote this down. The term modernization is often associated with a negative connotation inherited from the colonial past. The civilized and educated modern is often placed at the opposite of the backward and uncultured traditional. Modernity often becomes synonymous with improvement, cleanliness, elegance, and desirability. This makes many conversations about modernization sound derogatory and offensive, as the term subconsciously implies that whatever it is that existed before modernity was, to say the least, lacking, incomplete, filthy, and undesirable. So I basically wrote this to as a reflection on my own, because every time I talk about modernity or modernization, I always get asked this question of, what do you mean? Like, what is modern? What is modernization? What does it mean to be modern? And like, where do you put the time frames and all these things? And I felt like it's important for me to sit down and like engage with this idea before I start to talk about my subject. Okay. Just a brief history about what was there before. Our knowledge of medieval culinary practices comes mainly from historical accounts from major medieval historians who often mentions the markets, the street food, and the public kitchens in their work. Also from Hizba manuals. For those who don't know, Hizba is like this religious institution that was there in the medieval Islamic period, which mainly comes from the Quranic command to enjoin the good and forbid the wrong. And it became an institution where there's someone called the Muhtasib, which is somewhat like a market inspector, goes around and makes sure that public hygiene is maintained and there is no fraud and etc. And these manuals that were developed for this muhtasib often talk a lot about the markets. And one of the main historians of the time period, which is Makrizi, was himself a Hizba, a muhtasib, which makes him was allowing him to give very detailed accounts of the markets. It's important to note that most medieval houses did not have kitchens, especially the middle and lower classes, which means that cooking was mostly an outside thing. The most that women can do was often to prepare stews at home and then send them to the um, like the nearby baker to cook them for them in the oven. And we have this book called Kanz al-Fawaid, which is the maybe the only Egyptian cookbook from this time period. Um, this book focuses on humoral benefits of foods, and what we see in this is a very dominant sweet and sour flavor profile from the dishes, where fruits are often mixed with meats and stews, and where vinegar is very, very important, an important condiment for many dishes of the time period. Okay. Moving on to the 19th century, it was very hard for us to find a cookbook for that time. And what we ended up finding was this random treatise that is versified. It's like almost like a poem. It's an 8-page poem that talks about food, drink, tobacco, and coffee. Um, uh, my supervisor found it on Facebook of all places. It was very random. And then when we did further research, we found it on Harvard Library online, and looks like someone downloaded it and put it on Facebook, which was very fortunate for us. The treatise is written by someone called Ibn Shabukshi. We don't know who this guy is, and he dedicates his book to someone called Sayyid Mustafa al-Sabbahi, nicknamed as Badr al-Din. Again, we don't know who this man is. But what we're seeing from this book is like a comparison between rich food and poor food, the foods that were distributed during events and celebrations, foods eaten in the market. It's a very lightweight kind of commentary of what people eat at the time. It's important to examine this work or this manuscript in the historical context of the time. This is a time where Muhammad Ali, who was the governor of Egypt, who made Egypt almost semi-independent during the late Ottoman period, he has embarked on what was named the culture and agricultural revolution, where he completely changed land ownership, which also changed a lot of the social structure of rural Egypt, and expanded various crops, introduced many new crops which he brought from Europe and Asia. And this is also the time period where we see American crops become more well expanded in Egypt. Things like tomatoes and potatoes, they were at the early expansion phase. In the next century, this is when they really take on Egyptian cuisine and become staples of Egyptian food. Um, and then by this time period, we also see an increase in European influence thanks to the British Mandate in Egypt, which is from 1882 to 1956, and then also the French expedition, which was a little bit earlier and from 1798 to 1801. And then what comes with it also is an influx of European migrants, especially from Greece and Italy, who take over the food business in Egypt, opening multiple European-style restaurants and cafes and becoming chefs in royal courts and in elite houses. And we also see a formation of like a bourgeois, like middle classes, now having a European style education, and many were sent either by the government or willingly went to travel abroad, usually Britain, to get their higher education. Okay, um, let's go rush to the 20th century, where we see the materialization of this change. By the early 20th century, we start to see the rise of cookbooks and manuals dedicated specifically to housewives. So, in comparison to medieval cookbooks, which are usually talking to the cook, these are talking to women specifically, who are to be the homemakers, the who are have the entire responsibility of the household on on their shoulders. And these cookbooks were created by people like Nazira Nicola or Munira Francis, who um, got their education, like Nazira got her education in Britain, and wrote her book as a manual for home economics teachers, um, uh, which then became a cookbook for every housewife. Like it became the book that women would get as a gift when they get married, so that they know how to cook in their homes. So someone like Nazira was educated abroad and came in with her knowledge and created this very important manual. And of course, Munira Francis, who also was also a teacher and wrote and published the first cookbook that was made by a woman, which is called Al Tabkh Al Manzili, which is home cooking. Again, we're seeing here an emphasis on the home when it comes to cooking, whereas in the past, the cooking wasn't really done at home. So the emphasis, the linkage between homes and cooking is becoming very clear at this time period. Okay. The key aspects of these cookbooks is what we see here is um, a combination of European style dishes and traditional Egyptian dishes. So they don't reject traditional dishes. In fact, they do include them a lot, but they also include many European style dishes. There's an emphasis on cleanliness, organization, and order. Um, as I said, the books are addressed to women, and instead of the humoral qualities of foods that were focused on during the medieval period, now there's a modern and scientific approach to cooking and eating that is grounded in science and helps women take care of their families by making foods that are suitable when someone's sick or when someone's a little older or younger, or foods that are for the summer or for the winter. It's becoming, we're still focusing on the importance of food in terms of health, but now it's rebranded as modern science. Okay, so the conclusion that I aspire to reach in this thesis is that the social and economic changes, as well as the agriculture revolution attributed to Muhammad Ali, has reflected a new approach to cooking and eating in the 20th century. Instead of addressing books to cooks, the modern cookbook is now targeted primarily to women. The creation of the middle class, which relied on European influence education, and the shift from the aspiration for a Turkish and Persian elite, like the elite now doesn't aspire for Turkey or Persia, which we saw in the medieval cookbooks. Now they aspire to Europe, which we see now in the types of foods that they eat and the kinds of produce that they prize. Um, uh, so this shift in the elite, we see it in the food, and obviously eventually it trickles down to middle classes and lower classes. So when what we see in conclusion, that it takes more than 100, almost like 100 years for these agricultural changes and economic changes and political changes to materialize in the foods of the Egyptians. as we see in the adaptation of these foods in cookbooks and magazines and home economics manuals of 20th century. And thank you so much. That was it.
Thank you so much, Nouran. That was fascinating. And we already have one question in the chat. While you stop sharing and while Maria sets up, if you have a question and you don't want to wait for the question and answer period, you can go ahead and pop your question into the chat and I will read it later. I've got lots of questions for you, actually, but I'll have to wait.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, Maria, are you about ready to share?
Yes, just a second. I'll try.
Looking good.
Okay, everything is working now, yeah? Okay, great. My name is Maria. Thank you so much for this opportunity just to speak now. But before I speak about cultural memory, traditions, and sense of belonging and identity of Crimean Tatars, I would like to just share a brief historical context that shaped this community. So Crimean Tatars are indigenous people for Crimean Peninsula with Crimean Khanate as a huge political center with deep connections with the Ottoman Empire, and then before it was conquered by Russian Empire. But the main and the most tragic turning point was in 1944, when entire Crimean Tatar population, like about 200,000 people, were forcibly sent to Central Asia. They are forcibly displaced with very huge demographic losses. And for decades, they tried just to come back to their homeland, and they got these permissions only in late 80s, late 90s. And then in 2014, when Russian and Ukrainian war started, again, more than 30,000 Crimean Tatars, they had to leave Crimea due to repression. Cultural and culinary culture, Crimean Tatars are well documented by Crimean, Ukrainian, and international historians. What I would like to contribute in this discussion, I just want to put this memory studies perspective. So my main idea is not what they cook, because we know what Crimean Tatars cook, but how this knowledge of how to cook and how to serve and how to share food helped them to maintain this sense of identity and belonging through this huge double and sometimes even triple displacement. And also I use several theoretical concepts like cultural memory by Alaida Asman, embodied memory by Paul Connerton, and also three mechanisms of transmission of culinary memory by Fabio Perasicoli, just transmission through written knowledge and recipes, material objects, and embodied knowledge. And we will see all of this mechanism, but embodied knowledge will be maybe the most important for Crimean Tatars. And now just several maybe key findings. My master thesis was about different national cookings and national cuisines in Soviet Union. So I worked with plenty, like really plenty, dozens, maybe like 80, it seems to me, culinary cookbooks printed in Soviet Union. And I can say that idea of Crimean Tatar was completely erased. They never used this word, but they used word Crimea just to describe Crimean wine, Crimean figs, Crimean nuts, something like that. So Crimea, it was portrayed like a Soviet resort, totally disconnected from indigenous people who were forcibly deported to the Central Asia. But despite of it, we can say that Crimean Tatars in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, they really managed to preserve this culinary memory. And maybe the most important mechanism how they did it, it was about embodied memory. They just gathered together, and it's very interesting that all this material they came from series of interview with Crimean Tatars who now live in mainland Ukraine, and also participant observation in different workshops, culinary gathering now. And really many Crimean Tatar women, they told me that they didn't remember how they how they were taught, but because they learn how to make Tatar ash before they even learn to speak. And they remember this very special evenings when granddaughters gathered with grandmothers and women from neighborhood, and they were talking for hours about lost paradise, about lost homeland, and they cooked this very Tatar ash which need because it's like small dumplings, and they're so small you can put 9 dumplings into 1 tablespoon. So you had the very specific just skill to make it, and they try to share it and maintain this idea. Also, we can say that coffee is a like central part of all their rituals, not because of special technique how to serve coffee, but because they mark all life events with special type of coffee, and they have special words like coffee for morning routine, coffee when somebody is dead, coffee when somebody just got married, and so they just mark all life events with different types of coffee. And also it's a very huge part of Crimean Tatar hospitality, and it's very this phrase I was heard maybe like just dozen times, that when guests arrive you don't ask whether they want coffee, you serve it. You can reject, but you have to just serve it for the first time. Then I can tell just share the story because it's very painful, but I like it a lot because it's about family memory, how it can be overlapped with huge historical context. It was told by Lerone Haybulaeva. Then her grandmother Medine, she was cooking sarma. You can see it's just minced meat in grape leaves in the morning when she was deported and she was forced to leave her house, all her belongings, and also 2 of her children died through this transportation. And then when she arrived to Uzbekistan, every year on the 18th of May, it was the day of deportation of Crimean Tatars from Crimea, she cooked sarma because it was like her ritual, because and she believed that she will come back. And when her daughter and then her granddaughter, they came back to Crimean, they cooked it every day on the same date. And now Lerone, she was forced just to leave Crimea because of political repression, and then she lived in Kiev, and now she lives in Lviv because of full-scale invasion. And every day she's still cooking sarma, and I just made interviews with her like for 4 times during the last 3 years, and I tasted it also, and it has a very great symbolic meaning, not only for her but the community around her. Also, we have some tension and some troubles with appropriation because really, as I already told, Crimea, Crimean Tatars culinary heritage was totally erased from public space in the Soviet Union, but some of their dishes were adopted and just a bit renamed. For example, it was very popular fast food in the Soviet Union from like 1950s. We had just plenty of cafes and small shops, and recipes were printed in cookbooks and magazines for women also, but it's about cheburek with pork. It's not halal. It's very offensive for Crimean Tatar people also. And now they claim it, but now it's even very popular in post-Soviet Union. For example, it's post-Soviet Ukraine, post-Soviet Georgia, post-Soviet Russia. And now they try to claim that it's appropriation, and they emphasize that you should use correct name, you should use proper recipes, because this dish has a great also symbolical meaning, and it takes part in many rituals in their lives. Also, as I already said, different restaurants then erased in Kiev, Lviv, and other cities in Ukraine after the Russian-Ukrainian war started. Many people, they hadn't some professional skills before. They just started to make cheburek or yantik just to make money for living. But sometimes all these places, they became a very powerful center for community gathering and for even promoting and making Crimean Tatars culture more and more visible. And now it also enters its way into even fine dining cuisine with special twist, and it also raised one more question about what is modern, what is traditional, and what kind of twist can be allowed. For example, can they add some mushrooms because they are not traditional for Crimean Tatars? Tatar culture. It's just a brief. My material based of plenty of interviews, and I can talk about it for hours. But I wanted just to share several key insights and key questions for the further research. It's about we should know more about relationships between Crimean Tatars and foodways between Krimchaks and Koreans, because two more indigenous ethnic groups of Crimean Peninsula. Now it will be very important just to see this difference of how Crimean Tatar now develop in different contexts in mainland Ukraine, in Crimea under Russia, and through diaspora. And also, as I'm as Ukrainian, it's a question for me, when we talking about multi-ethnic political nation, how to make all traditions of indigenous people of different nations visible, avoiding appropriation, and how to can we provide this respectful representation of culinary culture. That's all. Thank you so much. I will be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. That was terrific, and I'm really looking forward to this next question and answer period.